The Primarchs are one of the most unique things in all of Warhammer 40k. Truly, there is nothing completely like them. And whilst many people try and find similarities in other factions, there is something that is uniquely human. More specifically for the fact that they're vessels of gods. In case you missed the previous video that we did, we covered a theory in regards to the Primarchs being gods. And lo and behold, we came to a definitive answer that yeah, they really are. We consider that we have it confirmed in two different cases. That both Leman Russ being inhabiting the gods of Fenris, and Sanguinius the Angel, inhabiting the twin gods of Baal. We also covered what Corvus Corax inhabited, that being the god of justice and vengeance in equal measure. That video did quite well, and a lot of you wanted to see a second part, where I said I would cover the rest of the gods. So in this video we're going to be covering every single Primarch, and discussing what type of god, what character of humanity they possess. And we're going to be starting off with the First Legion, and the Lion. The Lion is one that's pretty simple. He's also inhabiting the god of a planet, but specifically the world of Caliban. Caliban is very unique, because it has the forest. The forest is not part of the warp, mainly because it has the Watchers. The Watchers are inherently a blank entity, that being anti-warp. So in essence, the gods of Caliban are essentially gods of blanks, anti-warp. Now some may argue it could be a shard of the warp that was twisted and changed and became that over time, but regardless of who, what, when, where, and why, the fact of the matter is that Caliban has a warp presence, or an anti-warp presence in this case, and it has lords over the domain. We know from the various books regarding the Lion and the Watchers, is that the Watchers exist in this type of council, and that they themselves have their god, and that god being the god of Caliban. And lo and behold, the Lion being what he is, and how he is very resistant to psychic damage, it's a pretty simple answer in that regard. It would also explain how he was able to exist in the forest for basically 10,000 years, with very minor aging, but hell, everyone loves good old Charles Dance. But then that begs the question, with the forest being what it is now, and the world of Warhammer being what it is now, what exactly is the Lion going to do now? Or rather, what is the god of Caliban going to do? But that's the Lion done and sorted pretty quick in this regard. There's not really much to talk about, considering we don't really know much about the god of the forest, and thus the anti-warp or blank, whatever you want to call it. But for the next one, we do have a fair bit to talk about, that being Fulgrim. Fulgrim represents the self-fulfilling prophecy and the gods thereof, such examples being Oedipus Rex from Greek mythology and Kamas from Hindu mythology. Both of these were rulers who believed that their sons would overthrow them, and thus they did everything they could to get rid of their sons, thus in turn giving their sons a reason to overthrow them. But what's unique about Fulgrim is that his prophecy is very different. In those examples, and pretty much any example from mythology, those kings are generally speaking not good, or rather they are moderate at best. And they want to get rid of their sons out of a fear of them being overthrown. They give in to fear. Essentially, it's a very negative way of doing it. Fulgrim, however, he falls into that not necessarily via a negative manner. Yes, he's very prideful about it, but it's his desire to be perfect for others. He has a very good nature about him, but it's that goodness and that desire, that pride, however, that causes him to ultimately fall. In an effort to seek more and more and more to become better and better and better, he ends up becoming the worst of the worst. And he goes from being the very pinnacle of what man should be, to being its very worst. The definition of a self-fulfilling prophecy, but with a unique 40k spin to it. Fulgrim is always a very sad case. He is the ultimate fall of corruption. He was the greatest of us, and he was laid low. But because of his own insecurities, his own pride. A perfect example is the quote, "Both Sanguinius and Fulgrim were perfect, but Fulgrim had strived for perfection, whereas perfection found Sanguinius." And it's that desire that ultimately led him to falling. But from the fallen phoenix to the Lord of Iron who still stands, let's talk about Perturabo. Perturabo represents the watchman, that being someone who has a very, very important role that is very necessary to the very survival of the Pantheon, but someone who is not liked by the Pantheon, not given the glory, and generally speaking also turns into someone who's not really likable. It's the idea that no one likes them, and thus they like no one. Two examples we have are Thanatos from Greek mythology and Hel from Norse mythology. Both of them are gods of the dead or their god realms, and in both cases they are looked down upon by their respective pantheons. Thanatos is looked down by pretty much the entirety of the Greek pantheon, and he doesn't like them for his part. And Hel is completely disregarded by Valhalla, that being the heaven of Norse mythology, and many look upon her realm of Hel with coldness. So too Perturabo is the case. He is incredibly important, incredibly necessary in his duties, but no one gives him the glory that he wants. No one adorns him, no one looks at him, no one appreciates what he does. Yet without him, everything would fall apart. Thanatos and Hel are guardians of the dead, Unlike Hades or the other realms, they are not rulers of the dead, but rather they are transporters. They do the incredibly important task. Because if the dead don't get from place A to place B, well, it doesn't matter that you have both of them. It's just going to all fail. So too, Perturabo falls into the same category. He is someone who does what needs to be done. And without him, everything would go to hell. But because it's not flashy, because it's not exactly something that is gilded, people just hate him. And lo and behold, he begins to hate himself. And ultimately, the culmination of his story is him realizing that it doesn't matter that people hate him. He has something that he needs to do, and he's going to do it. And if he doesn't want to do it, well then, fuck it, he's not going to do it. And that catharsis is something that a lot of those gods don't exactly get. But from the Lord of Iron to the Khan of the Stars, let's talk about Jaghatai Khan. The Khan is something pretty simple. He is the god of freedom, and thus the god of hunt. The Khan is pretty simple. The Khan's whole thing is freedom, being free, and thus he has a very strong connection with gods of the hunt. Again, Artemis from Greek mythology and Mixocoatl from Aztec mythology. Both of these are gods of the hunt. They're all about going forward and venturing, finding things and doing things. They're unchained by the social norms. And because of that, they're often outcasts of their respective pantheon. And lo too, so is the Khan. Many people forget that he exists, but he's one of the most effective, disciplined, and incredibly efficient members of the entirety of the Primarchs. Yet he doesn't want place, he doesn't want power, he doesn't want office. He simply wants to travel amongst the stars, to forever roam in freedom and in peace. Again, something that's very synonymous with other hunted deities. Also, that's something that's synonymous is martial prowess. Every single hunted deity is incredibly martially focused. And when you consider the Khan is one of the best swordsmen of the Primarchs, that all makes sense. The Khan is about freedom, and what is more freeing than to roam the forest in search of a good hunt? But from the Khan of the 5th to the Wall of the 7th, let's talk about Dorn. Dorn represents the Guardian, or the Praetorian, such as Heimdall from Norse mythology, Saulus from Roman mythology, and Dagda from Celtic mythology. All of these are protectors, wardens, guardians. They are the doorkeepers. But unlike the watchmen like Perturabo, these are all in strong relations to the pantheons. Heimdall in particular is said to be one of the right hands of Odin. These are the men who stand in the gilded halls. These are the men who guard the halls of the palace, who watch the doors of the citadel. They are adorned in gold, yet they still brandish black steel. Dorn fits that very well. He's no nonsense, and he gets stuff done. You can't exactly have Dorn over for a cup of tea and expect him to be a riveting orator, but you can trust that he will get it done. Dorn is a stalwart, bastion, brick shithouse of a man. He will not give up. He will hold that door until his dying breath. And of all the Primarchs, it could be argued that he was the right hand of the Emperor. But whilst he may not have been the favorited, he sure got shit done. And unlike Perturabo, he was richly adorned for such success. But from the good old 11 boy of the 7th to the fallen knight bat of the 8th, let's talk about Conrad Curze. Curze here is interesting because he represents the idea of a fallen deity. Curze could have been argued to be the god of justice, someone who watched over what was supposed to be done. Whereas Corvus Corax was said to be vengeance, Curze could have been the idea of justice made manifest. Not exactly nice, but not exactly evil on the other hand. For justice is blind above all else. But that's what he was supposed to be, perhaps. What he ended up being, however, was fallen. Due to his own vices and his own nonsense, he fell. Now, while yes, people argue, oh, he was placed in such a terrible position, at the end of the day, Curze made his choices. Curze never wanted help, he never wanted to get better, he simply wanted to be right. Which is why time and time again, he points and says, oh, look, the prophecy is true, I can't change this, when he didn't even try to change it. Again, the two examples we have this are Naush from Indian mythology, who was made Indra, one of the great kings. But because one of the female goddesses rejected his advances, he would fall into a drunken stupor. Thus, when he was set above the clouds and forced to speak the word of flight, in a drunken slumber he couldn't, and thus fell to the earth. Set is another god. Originally a god of storms, Set would fall into despair after murdering his brother Cyrus through jealousy. Again, these are gods who had positions of great power and importance, but because of their own jealousy and their failure, they fell. They fell terribly. And so too Curze is like that. He had the ability to be something great, to be the Primarch of a legion of justice. But Curze was so upset with everything that he did. The idea that it was his choice broke him. So instead of acknowledging anything, he just fell deeper and deeper into the hole until all that was left was blackness. Nothing. and lo and behold, he completed his fall on his own. But whilst he may have been pushed off there initially, he's the one who let go and fell into darkness. But from the Night Lord of the 8th to the Iron Warmonger of the 10th, Ferrus Manus. Ferrus Manus is interesting because we don't exactly know what deity he was supposed to represent, for the sole fact that he was corrupted by the Necrons. Whole video about that, by the way. So it's unknown how much of his god deity was corrupted and how much of the Catan went into him, if there was any interplay between that. But regardless of that possibility, Ferrus Manus is the god of war. Think about it. Ferrus is strong. He demands strength above all else. He's uncompromising. He's dutiful. But he's also loyal. Gods of war, generally speaking, can be rather chaotic and in some cases cruel, a la Ares from Greek mythology, but they can also be smart, dutiful, wise rulers and leaders. They're often seconds and counselors to the chief gods, a la Tyr from Norse mythology. I believe that that's what Ferrus Manus was supposed to be, a god of war, tempered, capable of great acts of cruelty and punishment and strength, yes, but generally speaking, a god that someone could count on, a left-hand man or a right-hand man depending, someone who you could trust. It's very much possible that the corruption of the Catan in his early days changed him to that. It made him more irritable, it made him more upset, it made him more unnatural and uncountable, a conflict if you will. But that's a little bit of hearsay at that point. But from the Warlord of the Iron 10th to the fallen Red Angel of the 12th, let's talk about Angron. Angron here represents the idea of the tragic god, tragedy made manifest. Essentially, Angron was supposed to be someone good. He was supposed to be a paladin, an empath, someone who could take the pain of others and put it onto himself, a shield of the Imperium. But in his goodness, he was torn and wretched down unfairly. Now, so some of you may think this is a bit of a stretch. It's not really the case. As you take a look at the tragic gods, Prometheus being the greatest example, he stole fire from the gods and gave it unto man so that we could grow and maintain. But because of this, because of his good act, he was deemed a traitor by Zeus, and thus he was chained upon a rock, for every day an eagle to come forth and tear out his liver, only for him to be healed and it regrow the next day, after day after day. An unfit end, an unnecessary punishment to someone who only wanted to do good. That sounds like Angron completely. And when you consider that Angron was the only one of his brothers to land on this planet, and how he went via the warp, it's my belief that the warp entity within him drew him to the planet of Nuceria, because it knew it was a planet where he would meet a tragic end. Essentially, Angron from the very get-go was betrayed, but by the god held within himself, the god that he didn't even know, the god that was always destined to be a tragedy. But from the tragic lord of the World Eaters to the first consul of Ultramar, let's talk about Rabute Guilliman. Rabute represents the governor. In the many mythologies of the world, there is a god who is efficient. Most importantly, he is not the chief god, he's not the king god, but rather he is an efficient governor, someone that needs to have a stronghold over his realm. But it's not exactly flashy. He gets stuff done, but it's not immaculate enough that it's part of the main kingdom. Two examples we have are of course Hades from Greek mythology and Anubis from Egyptian mythology. Both of these are lords of the dead, and their job is ensuring that the realm of the dead, often overlooked, runs smoothly. And again, somewhat ironically, their realms are the most prosperous, despite said to be one of the most damning of all of them, literal worlds of the dead. But no, they're some of the most prosperous and enjoyable of all of them, and that represents their ability to govern and to maintain, yet not in a flashy manner. It doesn't look good, but goddammit does it run good. It may not look like a 7-star Michelin meal, but it tastes better than it ever will. And I feel like that suits Rabute very proper. Guilliman is someone, he wants everything to be ordered, he wants it to be neat, and he wants it to follow regimented rules. Again, also something that both Hades and Anubis and other gods of the dead have. The line of succession between mortal and living is strictly guarded and contained. In Hades, there are each different levels to the worlds, and they must be maintained. Anubis is pretty simple. He weighs your heart of morality against the rules of law to see if you have been good or if you've been evil. And based on that, you will be judged into which realm of the dead you enter. Again, rules, law, code, and order. Sounds a lot like Rabute Guilliman in the world of Ultramar. But from the vaunted halls of Marc to the death-filled pits of Barbarous, let's talk about Morty. Mortarion represents the cruel god, the reaper if you will, the executioner. In every single pantheon, there is a executioner, a boogeyman god. This god is particularly cruel, it's unliked by the other gods around them, because their job is to kill, to harm, to destroy. Mortarion represents that. Mortarion's whole thing when he first got his legion is that they would go forth and punish and destroy. Time and time again, whether Mortarion was deployed anywhere, he eradicated life on a microscopic scale. Mortarion was death made manifest. When Mortarion came, nothing would be left standing. He was an eradicator made manifest. But what's worse about him is that wherever he left his stain. He didn't care what happened afterwards. So long as he got his blood, Mortarion was satisfied. So too are the Reaper gods of our mythologies. Poenia in the Roman mythology, and then Sekhmet in the Egyptian mythology. Both of these are gods of chaos and destruction, known that wherever they go, they will get their blood and they will leave ruinous wakes for mortals. Death, destruction, all of that and more. And that's what Morty is. And that's what his god is. Death incarnate, destruction incarnate, wrath and retribution, and the absence of all nobility and goodness. But from the unrestrained destruction of the 14th to the unrestrained magic prowess of the 15th, let's talk about Magnus. Magnus represents the unrestrained scholar, the god of wisdom. Again, the most common example we have is actually Odin, because both of them lost an eye in exchange for wisdom. But every single god and pantheon has their wise ruler, he who possesses knowledge unencountable. But again, something like those gods is that they're often self-destructive. They crave knowledge, wholly, truly, and utterly, but it's knowledge to a point that it destroys them. They don't really want knowledge for the sense to have it. They don't really have a reason to want that knowledge except for the fact that they don't have it. Magnus's downfall happened because he believed he was smarter than what he was. He believed that he had all the knowledge, therefore how could he make a mistake? It bred arrogance, something very similar to Odin in his downfall. He believed that he had all the knowledge, and lo and behold his actions directly lead to Ragnarok, when in his stupidity and his arrogance, he believes that everything figured out, but then he doesn't. And all of a sudden, the world ends around him. Something that is very similar to Magnus. And again, all these scholarly gods of various different mythologies have the same outcome. They desire knowledge, but their pursuit of knowledge is what ultimately leads to their death. And again, much like Angron, I believe that this is the same for Magnus. The god within him thirsted for knowledge, more knowledge, pushing and pushing and pushing. Magnus only fed into it. And lo and behold, what happened to every god in past happened again. In the pursuit of knowledge, the only thing that was found was damnation. But from the sad damnation of the Crimson King, we go to the even sadder damnation of the Wolf Lord of the 16th. Let's talk about Horus. Horus represents the Crown Prince, essentially the son of the chief god. Again, we have Thor from Norse mythology, Shiva from Hindu mythology, and of course Horus from Egyptian mythology. If ever there was said to be protagonists in mythology, it would be this class of god. These are the firstborn sons. Everything is rested upon them. They're at the head of everything. They're at the line of everything. And they are said to be the best and the greatest of them all. But interestingly, in all their stories, they have their own falls. Thor as well is said to have many different issues and falls, and ultimately he falls in Ragnarok. Horus and Set are said to battle completely and often, so much so the fact that Horus initially loses because of his arrogance. Shiva as well, someone who encounters many battles, but he himself is set upon his own trials and tribulations, being exiled. All these characters, they are placed in falls, ultimately because of their flaws. Usually it's arrogance, or in some cases it's just a lack of understanding, and eventually they enter into a place where they have to fight, and in the end they rise and overcome, or they fall and be destroyed. And sadly for Horus, he took the latter rather than the former. Horus needed to be praised, he needed to be loved. And when he did not get that, he fell. He fell far before Erebus even stood his sights upon him, for he fell in his heart of hearts, in his mind of minds. For the minute the Emperor left, Horus and his love left with him, and so too did the Crown Prince fall, and he never stopped falling until he finally hit the floor of the vengeful spirit, smoked by his father. But from the Chief Lord of Chaos to its Chief Preacher, let's talk about Lorgar. Now for Lorgar it's very interesting, because there are two different aspects here that could be a possibility and that I'm going to cover. The first is the obvious answer, he is the herald, with Hermes from Greek mythology being our most notable example. Heralds are masters of oratory. Many times they have silver tongues, which are said to enchant and enrapture those who hear them. They are incredibly good at what they do, and what they do is speaking everything really. Lorgar is one of the greatest orators of the Primarchs, arguably the greatest orator, Because remember, he was the one who did the convincing for most of the Primarchs. He's an amazing orator, and when you consider that his legion was the Imperial Heralds for a long time, it makes sense why he would be a herald god. But there's another aspect I want to go to, and that is the aspect of faith. Lorgar is a faithful man, wholly, truly, and utterly. He's a flawed faithful man, mind you, but still a faithful man. I argue that the god that inhabits him is not necessarily the god of a herald, but perhaps it's the god of faith, or the idea of faith made manifest. In Lorgar, Biggie took the idea of faith in the warp and placed it in one person. Perhaps he wanted to hold it all together, believing that it could be contained. But what he failed to realize is that when a man believes in faith, he will do anything, and I mean anything, to see his faith petrified. Anything. And what Lorgar did, it wasn't just anything, it was everything. But from the preacher boy of the 17th to the dragon dad of the 18th, let's talk about Vulkan. Vulkan is pretty simple, he's the smith god. Simple as. Vulkan, Hephaestion, Ogun, pick your myth. Vulkan is the god of smithing and crafting. And generally speaking, with the gods of smiths and craft, they're generally speaking nice people. They don't really have many goals or ambitions. They simply want to craft and take care of those around them. He's a very much so a supporting god. But another thing that Vulkan is that he's also the destroyer. A prime example of this is Surtr, the fire giant and lord of Muspelheim, as well as Quetzalcoatl, a feathered serpent of Aztec mythology. Both of these are protector deities, but in the same vein, they're destroyers. When their wrath and their rage is unleashed, they will cause about the end of the world. Surtr via Ragnarok, and Quetzalcoatl with devouring the world. So too, Vulkan is. Vulkan was the crafter, the creator, the protector, but the Emperor gave him the ultimate goal of destroying Terra if the traitors got it. By using the Talisman of the Seven Hammers, he was the end of the world. He was Ragnarok. And lo, it is written in humanity that the greatest of crafters and creators will be the architects of destruction incarnate. And Vulkan fits that bill to a goddamn T. It's a terribly interesting dichotomy, and it goes to show that the one you would trust with destruction the most is the one who abhors it the most. Or at least that was the Emperor's reasoning for Vulkan. But finally, we go from the Dragon Lord to the twin Hydras of the 20th. Let's talk about the Alpharius and Omegon. Now here with the Ferrus and Omegon, it's rather confusing as per anything, but we have two options here. It could be that they are meant to be the twins, the Gemini in Greek mythology. Twins exist in pretty much every mythology one way or another, and they have inherent link with one another. But usually they end up fighting one another for one reason, and that follows tragic and terrible. Now this could be the exact same thing that happened with the Alpharius and Omegon, and that being that they were meant to work together, but were split up, both by the Warp and then by the Cabal. Now again, this does make a great deal of sense, but there is another option that we have. Aside from them being the Gemini or the twin gods, they could be the trickster gods, a la Loki from Norse mythology, hidden in plain sight, always doing their own deeds and their own ambitions, yet ultimately, no one knows what they want. But what we do know is that they'll do whatever they can to get what they want. And often it ends for disaster for the rest of the world, and the rest of the Pantheon. Now it could be that it could be both. Or it could be that when Horus was sent to the Warp, his god soul was split, and lo and behold, so too will the gods within him split. So we could have two very different gods. Perhaps both are tricksters, perhaps none of them are tricksters, or perhaps the Gemini twins are just merely continuing their legacy. Who knows? But what is known, regardless of what god you believe that the Primarchs inhabit, they are indeed denizens of the Warp. The Warp is made of humanity, its belief and its emotions made manifest. And each and every one of these deities I presented represents something fundamentally human, emotion made manifest. The belief in war, in pain, in wrath, desire, love, hatred, despair, and every damn thing in between. And lo, the Emperor in his hubris thought you could attain the emotion of an entire species in the great vessels of but 20. Of the many things he was, perhaps he truly was completely arrogant. But yeah, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for watching this video. Let me know what you guys think down below. Do you guys like it? Do you dislike it? What do you guys think? Do you guys think I got the money around the mark? And like an interesting thing I want to put, you'll notice that all of the Primarchs associated with animals, a la Sanguinius, the lion, and Russ, they're all gods of planets, specifically. So, that's something interesting to look there. But yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. I love you and appreciate you. I want to say a massive thank you guys for watching, but even more massive thank you to my awesome members and Patreons. Shout out to my Lieutenant tier members, Mr. Eddie V3, Miss Major of the Void, and Mr. Curtis Studies. Shout out to my Sergeant tier members, Mr. Damiak, Mr. Warsmith.Fireheart, Mr. Andy McGee, Mr. Matthew Merrill, Mr. Sean IRL7, and Mr. Bullwin. Shout out to my corporal tier members, Mr. Tremayo the Math Kitty, Mr. Lord Rosarius, Mr. Tech Priest Toaster, Miss Shauna Smithers, Mr. Gentle Salamander, and the Wench of Warhammer. And finally, certainly but not least, shout out to my awesome private tier members, Mr. Thomas Wells Lawns, Mr. Iva_SBW, Mr. Monkey Man, Mr. Michael Aeda, Mr. Diego Castro, Mr. Fortus Udom, Mr. CM Dine, Mr. Eric Mossero, and Mr. Dom Marek. Thank you, I love y'all, I appreciate y'all. Someday with the memberships, get a bunch of awesome benefits, early access to this video, behind the scenes stuff, and most importantly, you get to help out your boy. But remember, this will always be free. So we give you a word and out. I will love you just the same. Mwah! But ladies and gentlemen, I've been the General Bradley 101. You've been beautiful, awesome, and amazing people. Thank you all so very much for watching. Y'all make sure to say love there, boys and girls. And I will catch y'all next time. Dismiss Rangers. Someone's gonna be mad at this video. I don't know who, but someone definitely will. Also, fun fact, it turns out Erebus is the name for the Greek god who turned out to be the child of chaos in Greek mythology. Fucking who knew that shit?